Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this week's edition of Benchmark, in our lead story, we look at the nation's finances and encouraging visitor numbers on the tourism front. Then in our feature segment, we turn the spotlight on Professor Udita Liyanage, Director of the Postgraduate Institute of Management, for his take on Professor Philip Kotler's recent visit to Sri Lanka. And we wrap up this edition by talking to LMD columnist Samantha Amarasinghe about the progress being made on the Port Development Programme. That's the lineup for Benchmark this week. Hello and welcome to Benchmark. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. The nation's economic news gets top billing this week. The sun continued to shine on Sri Lanka tourism in May, albeit with slightly lower numbers than in the previous month. The number of tourists arriving on our shores registered over 48,400, which, despite being less than April's near 64,000, represents a growth of 39% from the 35,000 odd that visited our land in May 2010. Overall tourist arrivals for the year to date have already passed the 325,000 mark, and the 40% improvement in volume from the same term last year must mean that we are on track to achieve the 750,000 target set for 2011. In fact, if the present momentum or rate of acceleration from last year is maintained, Sri Lanka could end up hosting more than 900,000 visitors this year. The hectic pace of development in and around Sri Lanka's tourism industry, such as the major infrastructure projects underway, augurs well for a bright future, although doubts are being cast over projections of 2.5 million guests eventually in the light of balancing demand with supply. India continues to lead the way with the highest number of tourists, with over 16,600 in May and 68,800 for the first 5 months of 2011. And Sri Lanka remains an attraction to its traditional market. Indeed, some 41,000 British tourists enjoyed our sun, sand, sea and culture between January and May this year, although there was a slight dip in arrival numbers from the UK in May. Meanwhile, official data from the central bank indicates that the rate of inflation was lower in May than in the preceding month, the first downward swing in the spiral since January this year. The year-on-year movement in inflation dropped by 1 percentage point from 9.8% in April to 8.8%. However, the Colombo Consumers Price Index, or CCPI's monthly change reflected a 0.6% increment for May to 234.8 from 233.4 in April. Taking a snapshot of how the inflation numbers stacked up at the same time last year, the picture is one of higher prices today. The index stood at 215.9 in May last year. The year-on-year change at the time was 5.3%, while the annual average movement was 3.6%. The central bank attributes the rise in the CCPI in May to price hikes in food, non-alcoholic beverages, housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's gross official reserves at $7.2 billion on the 30th of April continue to remain above target, excluding Asian Clearing Union balances. Based on the previous 12 months average monthly expenditure on imports, $1,273 million, our official reserves were the equivalent of 5.6 months import value without counting ACU balances. Workers' remittances registered a near 35% hike to $500 million in March from $373 million in the same month last year. So yes, Sri Lanka continues to rely very heavily on its export labour to prop the crucial forex count. And Sri Lanka's export earnings in March surpassed the $1,000 million barrier for the first time, a significant achievement for our national economy. Growth in all major categories pushed year-on-year earnings for the month to $1,057 million, an increase of nearly 60% from $663 million in March last year. The industrial sector led the growth momentum with $813 million in export earnings. Textile and garment exports raked in $473 million. In the agriculture sector, sales from rubber products grew by some 75%, while traditional exports of tea, rubber and coconut also fared well. It's time to take a break for some messages from our sponsors now. And when we come back, we speak to Professor Udita Liyanage about the recent visit of marketing guru Professor Philip Kotler. Stay with us.